Welcome to MAPSpace. I am Patricia Miranda. I'm the founder director of MAPSpace and the Crit Lab, and this show is an amazing, beautiful collaboration between the Crit Lab and MAPSpace and Cynthia McCollum, or Cindy as we call her. Really excited to have an opportunity to have Cindy talk about this project, which is an incredibly elegiac, beautiful, thoughtful, intelligent, dense, poetic, aesthetically gorgeous exhibition about the impacts of climate change on species in a very local place where she lives in Connecticut, which I think that the thinking global is the best way to kind of get us to really close to something, to where it can pierce all of the kind of mindless data that we are overwhelmed with. So there's both an intimacy and a kind of global sensibility to the work, along with all of the incredibly thoughtful decisions that were made to communicate what is actually an incredibly dense amount of information. A lot of time and thought and effort went into this, and one of the thrilling things about working in the Crit Lab is being able to talk through all of these questions and decisions and ideas and aesthetics and material and everything over months and months and months, and then to see it come to fruition is just an incredible thrill and an honor. So I am just beyond excited and thrilled about this exhibition. I absolutely think it's incredible. It needs to be written up in the New York Times, so if you know anyone, please let us know. I also had to point out this incredible, in conversations about how much information is included in this show and how to have the work act on an aesthetic level with a kind of layered encounter to the depth of information and not be overwhelmed by data, but still have that important information included. Cindy has designed this absolutely incredible zine, and I just have to show you. I mean, she would talk about it, but I'm too excited. I have to talk about it. Where she has all of the real depth of information in there and has developed a way, an incredibly beautiful way, to have that information be present and available to the depth at which you as the viewer want to encounter it. So you can go in depth at any level with the work and in this. And these are for sale. For hard-earned work is really important. Available in black and white and in color. So with that, I'm going to be quiet and welcome Cindy and hear her thoughts about the development of this work, and also excited to hear any questions and stuff from everybody here. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. It really means a lot to me. And thank you, Patricia, for believing in this enough to have this in your space. It means so much to me. I guess this project started 2 years ago in the fall of 2022, so basically 2 years ago, and I had been doing a project called Birdsong, where I was listening to birds from my front porch every morning for a minute, and Merlin, the app on my phone, was identifying the species, and I tracked that for a year. But during that, I started thinking about what birds weren't there, what birds was I not hearing, and so I just casually looked up on the internet the endangered species in Connecticut. And I was shocked to discover that there are 662 species in the state of Connecticut that are considered endangered, threatened, or special concern. And I would mention this to people. Did you know that? Nobody knew. Like, this is happening all around us, and yet we're not aware of it on any meaningful level. So that was the impetus for this. I started with the plant scroll. If you followed my work, there's always been a lot of plants in my work. And I love plants. I can really relate to that. So this is the first piece I started. There are 331 plant species on the list. And each plant is represented by a 1-inch painted strip in the colors of the plant. And the scroll is 31 feet long. So it would go all the way down the hall out there. The insects which are on that wall were started second. And for each insect species, the way the whole project worked is I researched every species. So I would look it up on the internet or in books, read about its habitat, the reasons for its decline, and then I would look at photographs of the species, and I would use those photographs to paint some kind of a representation. So in the plants, it was just the colors, and sometimes like a little bit of the detail that I found, I would incorporate into its little strip. The insects are fairly, they're really tied to what the insect looks like, probably more than anything else here. I was really inspired by the patterns, blown up large. So with the insects, the system, this was something that happened through Crit Lab, was that every species that's on this list is designated either endangered, threatened, or special concern. And I wanted that information to be available to the viewer without it being too strong. I just wanted it, but I wanted it to be there if people were interested. So this was the first sort of chapter of the work where I sort of figured that out. The cards are on specimen envelopes, the kind of envelope that you might, if you kept insect specimens, that you might keep your specimens in. And the system is that if the species is endangered, it's inside the envelope, facing out. If it is special concern, it's on top of the envelope. If it's threatened, it's under the flap. But you'll notice that there are also a number that are turned around. And those species are considered extirpated. And extirpated is a word that was new to a lot of people during Crit Lab, and it means locally extinct. So it's possible that these species might still exist in other states and other places, but they are considered extinct in the state of Connecticut. Altogether, this wall is the invertebrates. These are the insects, and these are what's considered other invertebrates. So it has spiders and snails and other little shellfish, just fairy shrimp in there. In this case, the jars are, if they're fully facing you, like this one, that's special concern. If it's turned a little bit, that's threatened. If it's turned fully sideways, it's endangered, and if it's turned all the way around, it's considered extirpated. So that, with the jars, is sort of how I chose to indicate the conservation status. I'll just say a little bit about the, oh, I know one thing before I get away from this. So the cards that are turned around, the species that are considered extirpated are actually, can be found, this is the Encyclopedia of Endangerment, and I'm still working on it, but all of the species that are considered extirpated eventually will be represented in this book, along with the reasons for their endangerment or extirpation, and something about their habitat. So this is definitely still a work in progress, but I encourage everybody to check that out. So I did the insects, the invertebrates, the plants, the amphibians are over here. The same thing with the jars turned around. The reason that these are in jars is because these kinds of specimens are usually preserved as wet specimens, meaning they're put in a jar with alcohol usually, and so I wanted to reference that method of preservation. The birds are over here, and the reason that these are circles is because when I did my birdsong Merlin project, every bird species they were circles. And so it was just one of those things that for me, it just made sense to have them be circles. And the way they are on the wall here is different from how anything else is displayed. The birds are actually in flocks by their endangerment status. So the ones that are farthest from the ground are a special concern. These are threatened, and these are endangered. And I guess the mammals are right here on this wall. In this case, there weren't as many mammals, thankfully, but a lot of that is because the higher things that are up on the food chain, the fewer species there are relative to, say, plants or insects. And also, I would say that when the species at the bottom of the food chain or the web start to diminish, it can take a while for that to be felt through the whole web of life, but so I can't stop. I'm sorry. Anyway, with the mammals, I decided to, with the help of my crit lab group, to use the size of the animal to determine the size of the square. And at first I was trying to do the mass of the animal, but the difference was so great between, for example, a bat, which weighs just a few ounces, and a porpoise or a wolf, that I couldn't do it. So I used the length or the wingspan of the animal, and they are the size of the square is in proportion to the length or wingspan of the mammal. And finally, this is the cloak of endangerment. This is probably the piece that I'm most excited about and most proud of. And this idea, started in Crit Lab as well. I just can't even say how important it was for me in developing ideas to have this amazing group of people and Patricia to talk through these ideas with. And in fact, I'm just going to go back to that plant scroll. There are tiny holes in the scroll. If you look closely, you can see them. Those tiny holes indicate the conservation status. If there's a hole on the right-hand side, a slightly larger hole, that means the species is considered extirpated. But that method of indicating the status, I literally spent a year in Crit Lab with different methods. Every month, I would show a different method. I would have tags, I had strings, I had labels, literally every month I would be like, I'm really sorry, but you're gonna have to look at the plant scroll again because I still haven't figured it out. And really, it was like the last Crit Lab in June, I was like, I think I finally figured it out. So that's, you can look closely for that. They're very small holes. I used a Japanese hole punch, which is a super cool thing if you've never seen one, so much better than a regular hole punch. Okay, so anyways, this cloak was inspired by feathered cloaks of indigenous people. And I basically just painted a strip, like I did for the plants. These were painted on an 18-inch wide, that's a 10-inch wide, an 18-inch wide scroll of kozo paper, which is mulberry paper, one for each species. It took a really long time. It was 55 feet of painting, linear feet. And then I fringed it, and they're on here sort of in the order of how they exists. The plants are at the bottom, and then the insects. The birds are actually on top, and it's constructed on a hoop skirt. It's a flat hoop skirt, and I considered having it like, I have videos of my son Quinn and I like wearing it and twirling around in it, and it was really fun, but it felt too much like a hoop skirt. So anyway, that's the cloak.
So now that I have a chance to like see everything up close,
Yeah.
one question that I have that I'm really interested in is how you decided what exactly you might paint on. Like, how do you decide how you represent? Like, for example, I saw one owl face, but I think other than that, it looks either like a is it an aspect of the animal? Or?
Yes. I mean, I would always look at the species, at photographs of the species. There were a couple cases with the insects that there weren't any photos, so I just was like, okay, I'll just do what I think feels right. But most of them I could find a photograph of, and it just depended, sort of, like there are a lot of beetles, and beetles are, like probably visually not the most interesting, but some beetles are, like, these were like the bodies of dragonflies in here, and you'll see some butterfly wings, or even like the eye that sometimes is on a butterfly wing, you might find that.
Yeah, that's gorgeous.
Thank you.
Like I just love the way it's an abstract and not. I mean, it's just however you did that.
I often would like blow them up. I would like take a screenshot of it, and then I would blow it up and sort of look for a section that appealed to me that I wanted to paint, and I would use that as my starting point. Yeah. Some of them are looser interpretations than others. Like the fish are a little bit looser because I really was sort of going for the feel of it more than the exact. There's a little bit of a face, like in some of the mammals, you'll see that there's a sense of some bats' bodies and maybe a little bit of a bat face. But yeah, I stayed away from that. But yeah, there's definitely one owl face. Yeah.
I'm blown away.
Thank you.
I mean, I don't even care necessarily about this topic. That sounds crass, and I'm sorry, but you make me care. I'm glad. I feel the loss here. You've taken something meaningful, and the aesthetics are beautiful, and you've given a really deep meaning, and then that peace where you're embodying the loss. I'm putting my body, under the peace and feeling the weight.
Yeah. I wanted people to be able to look at that and have a sense of what it meant. 662, what that number looks like all together, and what it might feel like. So, thank you.
So I was curious, when you're working on, and when you were deciding on each grouping, if you had like a set idea ahead of time, how you were gonna represent it and like follow it through, or it sounds like the plans, like it was a bit of a work in progress. So if you could talk a little bit about that process, deciding how to represent and how to organize each.
Sure. The scroll, I started first, and I knew that I was going to paint these 1-inch strips, but it wasn't until I got the insects that I realized that I also wanted the endangerment status to be a part of it. So then, retroactively, I was trying to figure out what to do with this scroll. And I made a lot of test scrolls in order to try these different methods. So as it got farther along and I knew that I wanted to have the endangerment status be a part of it, I thought about that before I started. I kind of call them chapters or classes. So the idea of not being able to see the species that are extirpated, which I didn't end up covering these up, which is I thought about, was an idea that appealed to me, so that even though I painted them, they weren't visible because they're not visible. So that was sort of the thinking behind the decision to not show some of these things or have them turned around. But I still wanted people to be able to see what they were missing. So this is why I'm building this encyclopedia. And then I did a lot of research on sort of how species are scientifically preserved. And you know, at the beginning I had these crazy ideas, like I was gonna make paper mache something for the mammals, or, I mean, I just had all these, you know, I had all these ideas at the beginning of what might happen. But then when it would get closer to me starting that chapter, I would, you know, it usually became clear. Like like I just knew that these had to be in jars, those had to be circles, that the mammals were gonna be squares, the fish, I mean, I started out thinking about fish-shaped things, and you know, I just ended up trying a lot of different things before sort of deciding how it was going to look. Yeah, a lot of trial and error, a lot of making models or samples to see how they look. Even the size, even the mammals, I started out with the idea that they were all going to be the same size, and then they were going to be different sizes, and then they were going to be, you know, on panels, and so there were a lot of different iterations for some of these things during the process. And that sort of, yeah, that's right here. If I didn't ask me the follow-up.
A little bit. I guess I'm also curious, did you have like a specific order that you worked in the different chapters?
Yes.
And then did you, sorry, follow up, did you have to like go back? If you were like on a chapter and discovered, you know, you're saying, oh, I didn't want to show.
Right.
Then did you go back and alter everything previous, or did you do?
Well, I didn't go back. I mean, I altered this in that I punched the holes, but I did consider covering up all of those species. It just didn't feel right for the piece. But because this was one of the earliest things, I had that idea in my head. But in all cases, I'm just going to grab this notebook from the hall. All of the classes I did in the order that they appear on the list of the Connecticut environmental website has, there's a link on my website, or you can also just Google it, but it has, by taxonomic class, it has all of the species that are on these lists. So, and they're alphabetical by their Latin name. So in every case, I started at the beginning of that list, and they're presented, except for the birds, in the order of the list. So that plant up at the top is Aedes balsamea. So, and that's how I proceeded. This is the first insect on the list, and going through them all. Yeah. So.
Love the title of the show. Tell me about how that sort of worked.
So that was another thing that we worked through in Crit Lab, where I would start with like a list of 20 ideas, and we would talk about them. And this was on there from the beginning. It's actually a line from 13 Blackbirds. And Christine is here. And from the beginning, when she read that list, she was like, that's it. That's the title, Cindy. Yeah.
Yeah, I was advocating for it.
You were. So I don't know if I wanted something that was poetic, but that without saying, you know,
Yeah.
endangerment or something.
Yeah.
But that, for me, it has a little bit of the feeling of
Yeah.
sadness and loss
Yeah.
that's embodied in this exhibit. So that's how I.
And this is not a static, I mean, time goes on and things continue to change.
Yes.
And are you done with this exhibit, or does this exhibit live on in terms of its content?
Yeah, I think that it's an ongoing project. Like, for example, this encyclopedia, I'm still building that out. And inevitably more species will be added to that book. That's just reality. And like with the plant species, I can go back and punch another hole when another species is added. They actually only update the list in Connecticut every 5 years. And it was done in 2020, so at some point it'll be updated. And you know, some things come off the list. I mean, I don't want to be like totally a downer. Like, there are things that come back. You know, waterfowl have been really protected over the last 5 or 10 years, and they've really made a comeback. So that's encouraging. I mean, one of the things that I talk about in my zine is things that everybody can do, because if you have a yard, there's a lot you can do, and it starts with the plants and planting native plants, because native plants support native insects, and native insects support native birds and native amphibians and native reptiles. So I think that there is room for hope, and there are, you know, other things people can do, having less grass, not using pesticides, turning off your lights at night so that there's darkness, because a lot of species really need the dark. So yeah, and I'm also interested in sort of adjacent things. Like, I'm really interested in, you know, a lot of butterflies and moths rely on a particular plant as their host plant. Like the example that everyone usually knows is a monarch butterflies. They need to have milkweed. They lay their eggs on milkweed, and the milkweed caterpillar only eats milkweed. So if there's no milkweed, there's no monarchs. And the fact is, that's so true of most of the butterflies. So if we don't have those plants, we won't have those butterflies. And so that interests me. It's just something else that I'd like to dig deeper into. And I mean, I saw so few butterflies this summer, it's sad. More than sad. Tragic. So, did I answer your question? Yeah.
Cindy, I want to commend you on the extent and depth of this project. It's wonderful. I have lots of questions, but I'll keep it short. I'm sort of interested. I know the critique process and, you know, and everything, and month to month, kind of, I'm talking about changing things and switching things out. I'm sort of thinking about the questions you were asking yourself during this process, because it helps me know other ways to get around my work. I know your background in printmaking.
Yes.
And I know from following you on social media, you were interested in the birds genre. But I'm wondering, after you did the investigation with the birds, did you think to yourself, okay, I'm done? Or what led you into the other species? Was it just a concern or a question you asked yourself? Or?
Yes. It was the question that I started thinking about was, what birds was I not hearing? Like, I heard a lot of birds in a year, but I felt like there were more birds that I would have heard 50 years ago.
Right.
And that's what caused me to sort of start looking into this. And
But how did you go from the birds to the insects?
well, because Well, they are all tied together.
Yes.
Yes, but when you go to that website, Connecticut Department of Environmental Protection website, and you look at the birds, you can't help but notice that there's a list for the insects and there's a list for the plants, and they're all right there. So you can just click on it really easily, and then you start scrolling through, and there's like 14 pages of plants and 10 pages of insects, and I was like, wow, and it made me think about, well, of course there are fewer birds because there's fewer insects for them to eat, and
Sometimes I think, as artists, we are interested in a certain topic, and then once we finish that topic, we think, oh, we're done. But you didn't stop there. You just kept on going into the other areas, and other than continuing documenting the endangered species of all types, how do you see this related back to your other work, your printmaking, or any future work you might want to do?
well, I think that all of my work always has been about organic things. Like, I've always had this love affair with the natural world. Like, that's my whole life. And so when I was printmaking, I did a lot of plants, and I did do some things with invasive species and endangered species over the years, and looked at different ways of sort of classifying plants and using real plants in my printmaking. And even the 13 Moons project, took place, it was about a natural place. And I did use the cycles of the natural world sort of as a starting place to organize that project. But it was very much about that place and me being on the ground, on my feet, walking in that space and noticing. And, and that was during the pandemic, and that was sort of like, aside from my family, that was like the most important thing in my life, was going there every day and looking at the natural world and experiencing it.
Laura,
Yeah, I wanted to say that you've done in such a beautiful way. You've brought us into this in terms of our kind of roles and responsibilities. There's this kind of very delicate way that you've done that, and I really admire that so much. In terms of it's a critique. It's actually if you're really listening, it's a pretty strong critique. But you're managing to. It's not just a taxonomy of beautiful renditions, right? There's this evocation of the cabinet of curiosities and all of the kinds of things, the cultural things, the baggage that comes with that, or the role of the reading of the names. Like what is it to memorialize that, or escape at the end? I don't know quite what to call it, but the implication that if I put that on, I would be a part of it. There would be the labor of carrying it, and then what is my role in all of that? Like I look at this scroll and I think of, so many ancient texts that have disappeared, or that are now we've managed to kind of translate and realize, or, our own histories. So you've done it in such a beautiful way and such a delicate way. And it's not the first time an environmental show, right, has that theme, but you've done it in a way that's so beautiful and so intelligent. And I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Pretty baubles for rich people, like what is the role of this and how can art speak to the problems of our day? And so the questions around aesthetics in this project were really important, right? The aestheticizing of, challenging information is really a thing, right? It's like ruin porn, right? You see that, stuff like that.
I told you that, and the residency I did in Sardinia, when I shared this with the other artists, one of them said, don't you think you're aestheticizing this tragic situation? And I felt that.
Yeah, it's an important question because there is an edge, right? And I think that one of the things about the thoughtfulness of this exhibition and the ways that Cindy unfolded each question about how to use an aesthetic to make a meaningful, to not aestheticize something as a kind of, oh, look how beautiful, we're so sad, and we go home, but to kind of have that information resonate at deeper and deeper and deeper levels where you feel it in your soul, I think is part of the question. So just some of the things that she was talking about at the decisions to make, like making paper mache animals or this and that, were a lot of questions about like where does that aestheticization get in front of this powerful information that you want to communicate, and when is it this perfect collaboration where you can't separate them. You can't, this beautiful decision is entirely inside the conceptual framework of the work. The envelopes, the turning, right? The turning is a beautiful gesture. The envelopes are beautiful, and yet they hold in them all of those questions that you care so much about. And the sort of stripping away, like those being fish, like wanting to make fish shapes, right? But then deciding, no, that's an aestheticization that goes a little too far, and to have these, somewhat austere rectangles, but with this beautiful painting, that's a great example for me of like, balancing that aesthetic with the really complicated information that you're trying to communicate. That is all visible. One could come in here and say, this is really beautiful, and go home, and that's okay. But the longer you stay, the more you see, and you can't unsee. So I think that's really powerful. And some years ago, we had a residency here with Sarah Lutz and Beth Derry, and it happened during Sandy. And they had mapped the Byram River on the walls of this gallery 100 years ago now, and what it was projected to be 100 years from now. And Sandy happened in the middle of this. So we had a talk here. It was really amazing because we felt the impacts of this really deeply and immediately. They were both forced out of their homes because of the hurricane and everything. So we had Pam Solo, who's the founder of the, Pam Solo, she's a MacArthur fellow who works on environmental issues from the political and, the sort of political side, right, on laws and all of that activism and stuff. And we asked her at the thing, like, how can art speak to these things? Is it just a frivolous thing to make a beautiful object? And she said, no, just what you said, which is a great segue, that, we are inundated with so much data, and it's really hard to manage and negotiate. Like, what do I do here? What do I do there? What do I care about? Where do I place my heart? And she said art can bypass that and somehow locate those things in our bodies and in our heart. So I think this does this at so many levels. And the last thing I want to say is that what is so visible in everything you do, and in particular in this exhibition, is the love. And I feel like we don't use that word. Somehow like we can't use that word in art somehow. But I mean, the love that you feel, the care that you feel about these issues and these topics that compelled you to do, like to find another thing, to dig deeper, to stay with it, to not give up, to kind of keep going, despite the grief and all of that. It's the love, and it's really, really visible in every inch of this exhibition. So, thank you.
Thank you for supporting me through all this.
It's amazing. Well, look what came of it, right? So, thank you so much.